Welcome to another edition of the Trekking on Route 66 in Missouri Oral History Project, a collaborative initiative between the Missouri State University Libraries and OzarksAlive.com. My name is Kaitlyn McConnell from OzarksAlive.com. My colleague from the MSU Libraries is Tom Peters. This project is made possible in part by a grant from the Route 66 Corridor Preservation Program of the National Park Service. Today's date is Saturday, September 2nd, 2017. We're here in Springfield, and my guest today is Mr. Charles King. And first off, Mr. King, if you could just kind of tell us how you got into trucking, where you're from. Are you from around here? Or just kind of the backstory behind it.
Actually, I'm third generation native of Berry County, down here on Flat Creek.
Yeah.
And after high school, I run around over the country for a year or two, and I enjoyed traveling, and of course everybody down in that country grew chickens, and that actually led to driving a truck, and I just always was looking for a job where I could get away from Berry County for a little bit at a time without actually leaving. So I went to work for an old boy down there hauling ice pack chickens out of Monette and around that area in the edge of Arkansas, and kept going by. Frank Roundtree at that time had about a dozen trucks there where the four-way stop is in Monette now, and about anybody could go to work for him that even without much experience, and that's actually where I went to work. He didn't pay much money, and his old trucks was old and slow, but you could get a little experience working down there.
About how old were you then?
About 19 or 20 when I first started driving a bob truck around there, but you had to be 21, you're supposed to be, to run interstate, and so I was 21 years old when I went down there to Roundtree's, and he hired me.
Well, back then, you're 21 years old. Most 21-year-olds don't know how to drive a big truck. So how did you just have to figure it out, or do they have training, or how did you do that?
There's not much to driving a truck, really. I was raised on a farm, and if you're raised on a farm, you're used to driving from about 14 on, and driving hay trucks and tractors and stuff like that, and driving a truck's really not much difference than driving a car. You just gotta be a little more careful and keep in mind, but about anybody can do it, but most people wouldn't stay away from home like that, or a lot of people wouldn't. But that was kind of the way that I got started.
So when you started with Mr. Roundtree, were you doing chickens with him as well, or was
we hauled ice pack chickens out of Green Forest, Arkansas mostly, but also down around DeQueen, Arkansas, and 2 or 3 places around there. And most of our loads went to Lehigh Sales in San Francisco in the Bay Area. But we'd have drops out through there beginning about Sacramento. Had one run that went through Nevada and through with a drop in Reno, and then up over the mountain into Sacramento. But we always usually wound up there at on the Embarcadero at San Francisco Merchants Ice and Cold Storage, and then that was pretty well located for produce back. We haul fresh produce back out of the San Joaquin Valley a lot, and of course in the winter time you'd haul lettuce out of it. It'd start down in Arizona, way down around Nogales, and all the way up to Salinas and up through there, and there was a lot of guys from this area hauling, but that was basically what we did the year round, just depending on the season. The loads we get back, the loads out west was always ice-packed chickens. Usually, back then, I believe we were allowed, that's been a long time ago, I think the 64,650 was the gross weight we were allowed. That was 440 boxes of ice-packed chickens with ice and everything.
So ice-packed, I mean, how long, this is a silly question, I guess, but I'm not picturing ice lasting all the way from here to California.
Yeah, we had insulated trailers, and they all had units on them, but actually those chickens kept better if the boxes were filled with, I can't remember how many chickens there was in the box. These were dressed, and then the box had ice in it and chickens, and then we'd go down there to Railways Ice Company at Monette and blow, I don't remember how many blocks of top ice on it, and that stuff would gradually melt on the way to California. Sometimes we'd stop in Albuquerque and add a little top ice, a little more top ice, but it actually kept the chickens a lot fresher than if you got the temperature too cold in there with the unit and froze the crust on that top ice and stopped melting. While sometimes it would melt from the bottom and you'd lose some chickens on the bottom row. So it was worked pretty good back then. I don't even know how they do it now anymore. I haven't talked to anybody that hauled chickens in years and years and years, but I'm sure they're still doing it.
Yeah, I mean, we're still eating chicken, so they must be doing it some way.
More than ever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you mentioned kind of ending up at some places in California, whatever, that, aren't at the end of Route 66, but you still used Route 66 to get out there?
Yeah, we ran I've been on every inch of Route 66 at one time or other back in those days. But we followed it to Barstow, California. Then we always cut across, going to San Francisco, we'd cut across on, I believe that was 466. Like I say, boy, that's been a long time, and I don't remember, never did remember too well. But we'd cut across on 466 and go down to Hatchby and hit 99 in Bakersfield and take that up to some road that went across there to Highway, I believe that was 1 all the way. Anyway, that's been a long time ago. But the most of the time we just ran as far as Bakersfield. I mean, as far as Barstow. And between all of our loads came back, most of them came back to St. Louis, to the produce market at St. Louis. And we didn't run 66 much farther than that. But between Kansas or St. Louis and Barstow, why we made about a trip a week out through there.
So when you start, you didn't actually start in Monette. You'd start from St. Louis and go out and then come back.
No, we'd start from Monette. We'd go out to Green Forest and load, but we would always wind up back in St. Louis, and a lot of times we'd usually come back empty from St. Louis to Monette and have a day or so off, and then we'd go down to Green Forest and load again.
So it'd take you about 3 days to get out there one way and 3 days to come back or so?
Probably back then, seems to me like we figured 24 hours to Albuquerque on them old trucks.
Wow.
They were old GMCs with 218s in them and some Macs. He had some B61 Macs. And actually, even back then, that wasn't enough truck to run to the West Coast, but we managed to do it. But there was a lot of grinding out through there, 20, 25 miles an hour. There'd be times when you'd leave Santa Rosa and all the way to Klein's Corner. Boy, you'd never get out of third or fourth gear. Just it was you definitely had to enjoy what you're doing. I was getting 3 cents a mile for, and that was first driver.
Wow, so 3 cents a mile. Do you remember roughly how much you'd get per trip?
Well, it seems to me like, I don't know. I think I was making over $100 a week on the weeks that seems like it was around $120 that I'd make going to San Francisco and back. And if I could do it in a week, that's running two man too. The guy running with me always got about nearly 3 cents, 2 3/4 or something like that. And you could just make at that time about $40 a week around Monette there. Of course, we didn't figure that we was probably spending half of that on the road. But anyway, it was a little more than we could make around Monette.
Did they give you cash to pay for gas and stuff, or how'd you pay for that?
I was trying to think of that the other day, and old Frank would give us 4, I believe, $75 checks. And
then you just make it out to wherever you had to get gas, or were you told where you were supposed to?
We'd cash the checks out, and there was unfortunately he was always running about $2 short somewhere, and a lot of people, it got to where there was places you had to pick out to cash the checks because they didn't always cash the first time. A lot of trucking companies, small ones like that, operated that way. They just barely making it, and of course operating on somebody else's money a little bit too. But it's hard to believe now, because when you start out to go on vacation with $75 probably won't get you to the Kansas line in a truck or motorhome or something. But we used to get to San Francisco and back on about $300 round trip.
Wow. Yeah, I was just thinking, because today you would, put on a credit card and then get reimbursed for it later, but you weren't able to do that back then. So
yeah.
What happens if you broke down somewhere along the way? Did that ever happen?
Oh, about every trip. Well, sometimes you'd fix it yourself if you could, or you'd just have to, honestly, a young guy driving today just can't imagine what that's like without a cell phone or without anything like that. And no one even had CB radios back then, and we just have to flag somebody down. Hey, you see a truck stop, a man out there, somebody would stop right away. Another truck driver would stop, and he'd haul you in somewhere, and you'd call old Frank and say, "Well, number so-and-so's broke down out here." And he usually had a pretty good list of mechanics along 66 out there that he used, but sometimes it was just something that you could kind of fix yourself, or change a lot of tires alongside back in the old days. But I did that up until I got drafted in the Army in '61, and went to the Army for a couple of years, and came back, and I knew then that I wasn't going to be able to keep working down there. It was just getting too hard, and wasn't making enough money. And I'd had friends that went to Oklahoma City and went to work for Transcon Freight Lines or Leeway out there. totally different, altogether different job. And so I went to Oklahoma City in, I don't know, sometime in the 60s. Went to work for Transcon. And boy, that was a totally different job. You know, they operated the way a big company should, union wages, and you didn't have to worry about working on anything, or you had numbers to call anytime you broke down, and somebody would come out and fix. But we still ran 66 a lot for, of course they ran coast to coast, but it wasn't as much fun as running them old Jimmies from Monette on out through there. I sure had a lot of good memories from those days.
Well, I'm still thinking about when you're breaking down by the side of the road and you got a whole truck full of chickens. I mean, you'd have to get it fixed pretty fast, or they'd be all ruined.
Yeah. Usually you didn't lose. We never lost hardly any chickens, but I lost a little produce along the way. Well, hauling fresh strawberries out of Watsonville, California was that was a pretty touchy deal, because those things just wouldn't. If you had a unit to go out on you or something, or if you got tied up somewhere a little while, boy, a load of strawberries could go bad. And there was something else that we hauled that was really touchy. And I can't even remember now what it was. Seems like it might have been asparagus or something, but it had to be kept at a certain temperature, or else it'd start growing in the boxes. And then they hauled mixed loads too, and that was really something, because at a certain season, you'd haul some loads like cabbage that needed top ice on it. But then you get some citrus fruit on there, and of course it's in cardboard boxes. And that top ice on the cabbage would melt, and the water would run back, and if you didn't have the citrus up on pallets, then the bottoms would collapse on all of your citrus fruit. And when you went to unload, the bottoms would fall out of all the boxes. There was a lot of funny things. I could write a funny book about the funny things that's happened back then. But I don't know if stuff like that's what you're interested in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what are some of the things that come to mind?
No boy, funniest deal I ever heard of. Never saw this personally, but it happened down there at Roundtree's. Back then, not everybody used Thermokings, which is a cooling unit for the trailer. And before that, they had bunkers and blowers, they called them, and had an ice bunker in the front of the trailer, just with a big fan, a blower, and a little gasoline Briggs & Stratton engine. And you'd fill that bunker full of ice and start that little engine, and it would blow air from the outside over the ice and blow cool air on your load. They hauled a lot of eggs that way back then. And this old boy come down there, and he had never seen a bunker and blower, I guess. Probably had never seen a truck. Anyway, hey, Frank had him to go load eggs over to Neosho or somewhere over there in that area, going to Fort Leonard Wood. And of course, they're kind of particular up there, on the government load. And they told him, said, now be sure and ice that thing here at Monette over at the ice plant. And of course, that old boy thought top ice, and what they meant was to fill the bunker full of ice. So he took it down to Railways Ice Company, blowed 2 or 3 blocks, of top ice on a load of eggs in cardboard cartons.
Oh no.
By the time he got to Fort Leonard Wood, he had eggs running out the drain holes. He lost the whole load. But, that's just one of the things that happens.
Well, what are some of the other kind of funny stories that stick out to you?
Oh, down there at Roundtree's, there was something funny happened. I don't think Frank thought it was funny. But an old boy, I still remember his name, and I won't say it. I imagine he's dead now, I'm sure he is, because I was just a kid. I'll be 80 years old my next birthday.
Oh.
And I was just a kid when I was working for the M21. And anyway, this old boy, he had some problems anyway. And he went to ice his trailer after he loaded it in Green Forest. Pulled down there at the Railways Ice Company, was on the east end of Monette, on down past the skating rink and plumb out of town. Almost you crossed a little, I guess that's Kelly Creek. Didn't even have a bridge on it. It was just a dip down there that was paved. And a lot of times there wasn't even any water in it except when it was raining a lot. And the ice plant was right across from that. Well, you had to stop just as soon as you crossed that little dip and park your truck, but it was a little downhill back down to the little dip there. And you wanted to always shut it off and leave it in gear because them old trucks didn't have parking brakes like they do now, spring-loaded parking brakes. But guys got in a bad habit of flipping that trailer valve. And you could do that on a real good trailer, but on them old trailers Roundtree had, the air would leak off in about 3 minutes and the thing would take off on you. No. And this old boy run up there and run in to get his bills and flip that trailer air off. And when he come back out, his truck had rolled back down in the ditch there, full load of chickens, and turned over on his side and was laying on his side. Now, I think that's the last trip he made for Frank. That me and an old boy down here lives in Aurora now. I still see him once in a while. We run several miles out through there. In the summertime, Amboy, California was miserable. I mean, it was miserable. We didn't have any air conditioning back then. And that little old Roy's cafe over there, and right there in Amboy, that thing would just, we could barely make it to there and go in and drink iced tea and water and stuff and then travel on. But me and Linda was out there in our RV about 4 or 5 years ago, and came through Amboy. I just wanted to see it again, and it was completely deserted. Mm-hmm. But the old truck stop is still there and everything, and but there wasn't a soul around. I just couldn't believe it.
You mentioned that if you broke down along the road, another truck driver would, stop and haul you in. Was there kind of a culture of everybody was kind of friends who were truck drivers, or was that network there?
That truck drivers all stuck together. Mm. They really did. Of course, truck drivers just people too. I mean, you had bad ones and you had good ones, but the majority of them was good old boys. Most of them was doing it because they liked it. Mm. But if a man watched his P's and Q's and had his own truck, he could make a pretty good living if he didn't mind working hard and being gone from home a lot. Mm. But they was all pretty good guys as a rule. Of course, you've always got a few people, no matter what business you're in, that you got to watch out for. Mm-hmm. But yeah, they were. Back then, it was just a really a lot of fun for a single guy, And I don't know how a married man with little children could have stood it being gone from home like it was.
So what years would have this been primarily?
You know, I was trying to think after I knew I was going to talk to you today. And I believe I went to work for Frank in 1958 or 59, somewhere right along there. I was born in 38, so I'm sure that would have been about 58 or close to 59. And then I worked for him until I got drafted in the Army in 61. Came back out and worked for him a little while until sometime in 62, and then I went to work for the boy up there at Cassville that had a truck lease to Oklahoma Foods. That's a lot better equipment than Roundtree had. Them, like I say, them old GMCs with a sleeper about that wide, and of course I was 6'4", and although I was pretty skinny and I could sleep about anywhere I wanted to, that's still kind of uncomfortable in the summertime without any air conditioning, trying to sleep in an old roaring GMC or B-61 Mac. But I went to work for an old boy up there at Cassville that had a truck leased down there at Oklahoma Foods, and he had a new Freightliner, and with a lot bigger engine, 280 Cummins in it, and a 4-4 transmission, and you could truck in that thing, you know, and a lot easier, air conditioning and all that, but then I worked around there for actually about 3 or 4 guys at Cassville had their own trucks, and they all was leased to Oklahoma Foods. I worked for 2 or 3 of them, and until about I don't know, 66 or something like that. Then I went down to Steel Canning Company and drove there a while hauling canned goods. But that was run Chicago some, but we also ran back east, and I didn't care for that. And then I went to Oklahoma City in 1968 to work for Transcon, and we moved back here in 78, didn't we? A change of operation. Yes. We moved to Marshfield, and got off of 66. And of course, by that time, 66 was a lot of 4-lane. I can't remember if it was all. I guess it was probably all 4-lane. I believe the last stretch was between Flagstaff and Williams, I think, was the last stretch that they closed and renamed 40. But then, of course, Transcon just went out of business in the middle of the night, you might say. I had 23 years in with them towards retirement. I needed 30 years in the Teamsters to retire. And those deals, that's about the time that trucking industry, along in the early 80s sometime, it really took a hit. They deregulated trucking, and it really hurt a lot of, well, there was a lot of good jobs, a lot of good companies to work for before that. And now there's probably not. I don't know. I don't even keep up with that stuff anymore. I've been retired for more than 20 years. But somewhere along in there, why everything started going downhill. And then I believe it was 90, wasn't it? That Transcon closed their doors. And my wife had started back to college and get her teaching degree. And I just kind of laid around here and worked a little for Associated Groceries over here, casual, just whatever I could get. Mm-hmm. And had my application in 2 or 3 places. And Roadway Express called me in August of 90, I guess. I believe it was August of 90. And I went to work for them. Then we moved to Denver on a change of operation about a year later, and resettled in Denver, and I ran over the mountain to Grand Junction to Salt Lake City for a couple of years. And then they had another change of operation, and I went to Memphis and left Linda in Denver, and she was trying to sell a house. We bought a house out there, and I was living in Memphis and started running a sleeper again for Roadway to the West Coast. And that was a good job, except I didn't have my family down there, and I was working all the time. But outside of that, boy, it was great. But I looked around Memphis, and I didn't look like Springfield to me. So when she finally got the house sold out there, we kept this place here in Springfield, and I just had them to move my stuff back here to Springfield. I worked a while longer in Memphis, and then I retired and came home. I actually retired younger than I should have, but just got tired of being away from home, and figured that we'd never probably have to sleep in the rain or miss another meal, and I had some things I wanted to do anyway before I died, and so I had 20 years to think about them. I still haven't done hardly any of them, but we wanted to go away for the winter and spend a few winters in the trailer, and we did that, and a few things like that, and wanted to ride a little bit, and I've done that, but it's been a long trip, but it's went by pretty fast, really, when I think about the years as it passed. From the time I was 21 till I'm nearly 80 now, and it just seems like they just went by that fast.
There's been a lot of changes over that period of time.
Yeah, it is, but not really as many as you'd think.
Well, one thing that caught my attention in the beginning when you were talking, of course, being from Monette, is that I know that, Monette used to be a big rail place. Was that controversial at all, that trucking was coming in? Was there any bad feelings about that?
Oh, yeah, railroaders and truck drivers, that started way back before I started a driving truck. My daddy was a rocky hillside farmer. That's what he loved to do, and that's what he wanted to do. But and down in Barry County, nobody, especially if you lived east of Highway 37 down there in the hills towards McDowell, you couldn't make a living farming. Ain't no way. Especially not with 20 acres. Daddy had 20 acres. Granddad had 40 acres. And when Daddy got married, Daddy was his oldest child. He had two girls and a boy, and Daddy was the boy. And of course, the boy always got the land. And he gave Daddy half of it, which was 20 acres. And he was a hard-working, good man, but he just couldn't make it. So during the war, he come to Springfield, and got on with the Frisco Railroad. And he worked for the railroad, and then after the war, we went back on down to the farm again, and but he never could forget that good railroad job, you know, like in the railroad, and he finally got back on and retired from the railroad shops here in Springfield. And my brother worked he worked 39 years for the Frisco and later the Burlington Northern.
Yeah.
And but I always but we never did argue much about stuff like that. Daddy was partial to the railroad, and my brother was really he was a dispatcher and then a train master here in Springfield before he retired. And but we never did talk much about that. But out on the road, all railroaders and the truck drivers just didn't click. You know, I never did haul cars, but I remember back when I first started driving, Complete Auto Transit got into some kind of big deal over a contract or something, I don't know, and they started putting cars on trains, moving them by train, and I don't know, I think some of them truck drivers got to throwing rocks from overpasses at cars on trains. There was a lot of that stuff went on, nothing real serious, you know, but there just never was between the railroad and the truck drivers. There's a lot of good people on both of them, but they just never did really mesh. But you know, when I was working down at Memphis, we ran to 3 destinations: Sacramento and Adelanto, which is in the high desert out there, and Phoenix. That's the only 3 places we ran out there. And 90% of the loads we pulled was light freight on doubles. Very seldom you'd ever pull like 45,000, whatever it was we could gross. They sent most of that stuff on rail, but roadway, it's getting where any more of these big companies like Roadway Yella and those, they go to up at Chicago, they've got drivers that go to rail yard every day and pull trailers there and bring them back, and they work pretty well together with the railroad, I think. I've got away from the business. I don't even I don't pretend to try to keep up with it anymore. But
well, you mentioned that, you know, your dad and I guess your brother didn't talk a lot about you being a trucker and them being partial to the railroad, but did you get a sense in the beginning whether your dad thought maybe you should have done railroad, or did he not care at all?
Oh yeah, he of course my dad, just like most older men and their teenage sons, he was probably a lot smarter than I was at that age, and he did his best to get me interested in an apprentice program here at the shops at that time. At that time, you could Frisco would take you in as an apprentice and teach you a trade like electrician or trains had really come into their own. Diesel electric had at about the time I got out of high school. And when Daddy went to work for him up here, well, there were still a lot of steam trains. And he did his best, and all I could think about was getting out on that road, you know. My folks went to California in 1948 on vacation. And I took took me and my sister and my baby brother, the one who later worked his whole life at the railroad. We all took us all, and we spent probably 3 months getting out there, and Mother had relatives all the way from San Bernardino to way up in the San Joaquin Valley, and we stayed with all of them.
Wow.
That summer while we was out there. People done that a lot back then, and just visited, and boy, that gave me the fever of travel. I couldn't get that out of my mind. I was 10 years old then, but I couldn't forget that, and I loved that traveling, and I think I decided even way back then, I was wanting to do something where I could travel some, and look this country over. And that's kind of probably the reason that I started driving a truck too.
Well, seeing Route 66 so many different times, looking back, especially in the 50s and early 60s, did it seem like different parts were different, or was it pretty much seem like, could you tell you were in different states, or did it seem pretty similar regardless where you were on the road?
People are different, but there was really, it just almost seemed like there was a certain group of people, a certain breed of people that lived along Route 66 and done business along 66. And when I think back of it, it just seems kind of like a little bit like a big amusement park, all the way out through there. Boy, you just got to where there was a truck stop in Albuquerque, right downtown, but there was one. You went right through. You went through every town between here and the West Coast back then. Of course, Amarillo was that big steakhouse down there. That thing's been there for, I don't know if it's still there or not, but they had that biggest, some kind of a big old steak that if you eat it in a half an hour or something, you could have it. It makes me wonder how many people got sick trying to do that. And I never did even stop there, but I always looked forward to them signs. And there was this, in Arizona, there was a lot of, you'd go through there and you'd see signs. You's almost in the painted desert. And by the way, I did one time in my car, got off the road right there and drove up through the painted desert. And I still never did see anything that looked as interesting to me as the signs pointing to it. And the petrified forest, and you just seen stuff like in the Grand Canyon. And all those years I drove by those signs to the Grand Canyon, and we never got around to seeing it until about 8 or 10 years ago. We went out there, and but it was there was just, I don't know, there was just something about the whole road out there, and the truck stops, and the little old odd motels that you see, and you'd get forward, looking forward to seeing those things every trip, and it was Holbrook, Arizona. I'll never forget that town. And some other town out there that had this old, it was just, occasionally we'd run different routes too, but I didn't, in the winter sometimes they'd run us down along, I think it's I-80 now, but it used to be 10 down through Lordsburg, and actually coming out of Yuma or somewhere down there when we was loading away down south in the dead of winter. well, we'd run down through there and then to about over into New Mexico, the other side of El Paso, and take a 70 up through across New Mexico and Texas and back into 66 there at Amarillo. But I just liked 66 better. There was just something about Highway 66 that always everybody seemed like to run 66. A lot of them old Shaw drivers, Willis Shaw, run a ton of them old black and white trucks out through there, but they run east and west everywhere. But you'd always see a bunch of them on 66.
You said sometimes you went different routes, but I'm thinking, if you did Route 66 a lot, did you stop at the same restaurants or little cafes?
Yeah.
You probably get to start recognizing.
Yeah, you'd get to where you look forward to seeing the same people, the same waitresses, and you'd kind of develop a little bit of a friendship with certain people, and that was used to be an old boy that worked there at Kingman, Arizona. I'm sure that he's dead now, but he's from Arkansas, and he just had one eye. He was blind in one eye, but he worked at that truck stop, worked the night shift, and boy, he's a good old boy, friendly, and he always liked to talk about Arkansas, and I look forward to seeing him, and I'd always stop there and fuel, and sometimes we'd clean up. They had free showers, and I'd clean up there, but I always look forward to visiting with him every time I come through there, and hadn't thought about him in years. To tell you, they had a terrible explosion there one time. A tanker, that railroad run right behind that truck stop. I believe it was Phillips 66 truck stop, right on 66 there. And it was on the east, way out on the east side of, boy, I have times like this more than I'd like to. Kingman. And they had a rail car caught on fire there. I never did, and it finally exploded and wiped out that old truck stop. I don't think it hurt him, but it killed a bunch of firemen. Yeah, I think it just about wiped out the Kingman Fire Department at the time. But I'm not sure if he was still working there or not when that happened.
Wow.
But,
I wonder how, I guess there's no way to calculate it, but I wonder how many hundreds of times you've been along the route. I mean, if you said you take out some for when you were routed different ways, but, once a week for several years, pretty much.
I couldn't guess. I probably averaged three trips a month with the layovers and breakdowns and everything. Well, sometimes in the wintertime, we'd get hung up out there at that old truck stop at Fresno for 4 or 5 days at a time, waiting for a load, and there'd be so many trucks in there wasn't any place left to park. And of course, when you had to do that, well, you probably didn't even break even, because we'd always find something to do in Fresno when we was laying over. And in fact, I remember one time, one of Roundtree's old trucks run into the wall of an old joint up there in Fresno. that was it was a funny deal when you think back about it now, but at the time it's pretty serious.
Did the brakes just give out, or what happened?
Well, I don't know. The story I heard was they couldn't get it started, and somebody had got up on the fender with a screwdriver and shorted across the starter, and they had it in gear, and it started with him on the fender, and the whole thing come through the wall of the. I used to know the name of that old place, but of course, you know, stories like that tend to get embellished over the years, and it probably makes them a little better. But I think, I can't remember the name of that. Boy, for years I knew the name of that. That was kind of a gathering place when you had to lay over for 2 or 3 days, and guys would drop a trailer and bobtail to them places, which actually you was not supposed to do at all. But of course, you know how kids are when they get away from home. But oh boy. But all in all, it was a lot of fun, and a person could make a little bit more money than you could working in a chicken plant or at the shoe factory down there, but you probably spent more too. So
just on the road when you'd see something you wanted to do or buy or whatever.
Well, a lot of times it was. Unfortunately, we'd run across. We had one load. Seems like there was one load a week that went to Reno, with the first drop in Reno, the next drop in Sacramento, and then to Santa Rosa, and then finally down to San Francisco. And usually, if you caught that run, why, if you got out of that old truck stop over the other side of Reno to there, you usually had to have somebody wire you some money. That just, you know, young guys and them old machines and everything out across there. Of course, it was, I never did waste a lot of money on them, but once in a while you just get too enthused about it, you know. And the only places to stop out through there had them slot machines, and every time you cashed a $5 or $10 bill, every time you bought anything, they'd give you silver dollars back in change, and it was. But that wasn't too often. He probably had a couple dozen drivers on about, I'm guessing 12 trucks. I was trying to think the other day, and 2 men on a truck, and so one load a week, you know, that you might go months at a time without ever catching that Reno. And then there was always somebody wanting to go out there. So I didn't run Reno too many times during it. But I imagine I probably averaged 3 trips a month, round trips from Reno, to San Francisco, and then back into St. Louis. And we'd always, one of us would get off the truck there at Monette when we came back, and the other would take the load on to St. Louis. And sometimes it'd take you a day or two to get unloaded up there, and that'd give the guy who stayed in Monette a little time off. We hauled into the produce market up there majority of the time, and you'd always have 3 or 4 stops on that. That St. Louis produce market was it was a nightmare back then. All those people was up there, and you might have a load of, for instance, one time I came in there with a load of plums, and there wasn't any plums on the whole market, and everybody was wanting plums, you know, and you had about 3, United and Gus Mercurio and 2 or 3 more there, and you had, they was all getting part of the load. And of course, no matter who you went to first, the other one would be up there trying to get you down there so they could get some stuff. Mm. And boy, that was, then you'd hurt somebody's feelings. And when you went to their place, they wouldn't unload you. They'd carry it off a box at a time. And oh, it's just, it was really something.
So I'm trying to picture how that worked, because I'm not familiar with that at all. You weren't just bringing it to this place. You had different businesses there who were all
the St. Louis Produce Market is, I don't know how it is now. I haven't been up there, and maybe it still doesn't even exist. But it was a long row of buildings with a big area completely around it, and docks. And these people, I assume they leased spots in the produce market. United was one of the larger ones. They had a big cooler and a lot of dock room there. But the Mercurio had a smaller place, and there's all kinds of dealer, fruit and vegetable dealers around there. And I assume they just leased. Then they had little trucks, and they sold to grocery stores, to small markets and stuff like that. And we worked through a broker who had an office there in St. Louis, C.H. Robinson, and I bet they're still in business. I think he's got offices, or did have at that time, all over the United States, and probably still does. Forrest Kunkel, I still remember that name, was the broker that we dealt with, the guy that worked for C.H. Robinson. And he would arrange these loads for Roundtree out in the San Joaquin Valley, or the Giorgio brothers grew grapes all over the San Joaquin Valley, around Bakersfield, all the way up to, I don't know, way up north of Fresno probably. And anyway, he would arrange these loads. Roundtree dealt with him all the time. He'd arrange those loads, and then he was a go-between between them and the guys on the market. And he'd sell the loads to take orders from the guys on the markets. And Roundtree actually just furnished the trucks to move the stuff that C.H. Robinson bought out there and resold to the market, who in turn turned around and resold it to the little grocery stores in the St. Louis area. They all had smaller trucks, and they'd had 3 or 4 boxes of this and that. They'd fill out all their little delivery trucks, and it was kind of a network of deals. It was honestly interesting when you saw exactly how it worked. And you started all this, started in the valley of San Joaquin Valley, and made all the way back to the little mom and pop stores in the St. Louis area, and I'm sure all the outlying communities, and probably, but 90% of the things we hauled went right to the St. Louis produce market.
Wow. I wonder where the chickens went.
They went to Lehar Sales, and Merchant Size Cold Storage on the Embarcadero right there in San Francisco. And I assume that worked the same way. Then they probably were distributed out on smaller trucks to local groceries and stuff around there. I know before I went to work for Roundtree, when I was driving those little bob trucks, well, we hauled out of Armour's there in Monette, and also Mozart Poultry, which later was purchased by Tyson up on the hill. And especially Armour's had that one run that started in St. Joseph, and we delivered some of those chickens ourselves, all around the northwest corner of Missouri, up around Marysville and all around through there. But that was a lot of that was, and a lot of the stuff we hauled out of Armour's down there at Monette at that time. They had a little processing plant in Monette. Went on to Armour trucks. They'd meet us at a closed service station, like for instance in Salina, Kansas, and we'd throw certain parts of the load on different trucks, so they'd back up to our truck, you know, but everything start out with a full load, and then it breaks down and eventually gets out to the consumer, a box or two at a time.
Wow.
It's
a very interesting process.
Yeah, it is when you really stop thinking. Yeah, I didn't spend much time thinking about stuff like that back then. But you've got a lot of time to think about stuff on the truck.
Yeah,
it's true. Just did a lot of thinking, made and lost a lot of fortunes running down the road at night.
I guess when you started, most of the drivers were younger. I mean, because there hadn't been a career, you know, up until a few years before that.
Yeah, most of us started out to get a little experience and have a little fun too at the time. But everything, there was two places back then that you considered you really had it made. Was Campbell 66 here in Springfield, or JTL, Jones Truck Line, out of Springdale, Arkansas. Harvey Jones ran that, and of course old Frank Campbell started the one here. They were both union jobs, and boy, they were good. And everybody started driving a truck with the hopes of eventually landing a job at either Jones or Campbell, or those places, you know, they wouldn't hardest anybody like so many of them did back then. You had to really have some experience, and you had to know somebody usually to kind of put in a good word for you. And they relied a lot on the employees they trusted to put on good words for somebody that was wanting in. But that's just kind of the way it went. You put a few years in on a produce truck, and then you'd land a job with some manufacturing outfit around here, which was a step up. It wasn't quite as good as working for one of the major freight lines, but there was something about hauling that produce and stuff like that got in your blood. And if you wasn't careful, it's just kind of like hauling bulls. I never hauled bulls, but boy, anybody that ever has very much, they still talk about it, and it just gets in your blood. You enjoy doing it, but you just can't make much money. Most people can't. And that's the same way that hauling produce used to be. We didn't make much money, but boy, we just really liked it.
Well, thank you very much for letting me come chat with you. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you want to make sure is mentioned or included?
You know, I spent a lot of nights trying to stay awake, and tried some different stuff to keep me awake. But honestly, I didn't have much trouble staying awake when I was a kid. But I used to make up poems when I was running along, and one that, and I used to think a lot about writing a book, and I finally did when I wrote a book and self-published it here 2 or 3 years ago. But I've got wrote a lot of poetry too, and kept a lot of it in my mind, and I'd get to run along at night and start getting sleepy, and I'd get to thinking up rhyming stuff, and that helped me stay awake. And I got one that I wrote about a truck driver. Would you like to hear it?
Sure.
Would you like me to do it for you?
Yeah, that'd be great.
This is kind of a combination of guys that I knew over the years, and this typical truck driver now, actually, people that's been in the business can say, yeah, it sounds just like somebody that I knowed. But this old boy is strictly fictitious. So Horace Jones was born in Arkansas. That's where he'll probably die. Folks nicknamed him Hoss Meat, though I'm really not sure why. Hoss Meat was a fine man, good as gold, just not too bright. He had an 8th grade education and he drove a truck at night. Well, Lily was a waitress in a truck stop I won't name, and that's where she met old Hoss Meat, and that's where they'd play their game. Old Hoss would stop and see her about once a week or so, and they'd sit and talk about silly stuff. You know how them things go. Well, Lily had a husband. Old Hoss, he didn't care. He liked the way her Wranglers fit, and he liked her bleached blonde hair, and Lil liked Hoss Meat's gold tooth and the aftershave he wore. And her heart beat a little faster when he'd come grinning through the door. Now, all of this was innocent. But things don't stay the same. It's the natural progression of what's called a cheating game, and the little spark between them became a burning flame, and Lil's old man heard rumors of their little cheating game, and one night at the truck stop, they snuggled in a booth, and old Hoss is telling Lily, I love you, and that's the truth, when the truck stop door flew open, Lil's old man walked in. Lord, he is taller than Kareem Jabbar and weighed about 310. He had big old wide shoulders, and his arms hung to his knees. And old Hoss, he seen him coming, he cried, don't hurt me, please. And her old man walked over to the table, and he looked old Hoss Meat in the eye, and old Hoss just stood there trembling. He knowed he was going to die, and her old man reached down and patted him, as gentle as a son. He said, relax, boy. I won't hurt you for this awful thing you've done. He said, you want her fair and square. She's yours now. That's a fact. He said, the only way it hurts you is if you tried to give her back. But he said, I must be truthful. There are some things that you should know. So I'm going to lay them on you before you take my wife and go. He said, has she told you about the children? There's hers and mine and ours. But from this moment on, my friend, all 9 of them is yours. There's her crazy sister Mabel and her drunken brother Paul and her mother and grandmother. From now on, you'll feed them all. My friend, while you're at it, you can have her doctor bills. She's cost me $5,000 since April with her little aches and ills. When you see her in the morning, she's getting out of bed and she ain't got that girdle on. And that wig ain't on her head, and she's a griping and moaning when them big feet hit the floor. Don't try to bring her back to me, 'cause she won't be mine no more. Well, old Hoss Meat's face was gray and pale. He rose from his seat. His legs had turned to rubber, and he could barely move his feet, and his poor old head was spinning as he staggered across the floor, knocking over tables, and he bolted out the door, and he jumped in his old diesel truck and ripped that thing in gear, and Lil cried, I thought you loved me. But her cries fell on deaf ears. Old Hoss Meat disappeared that night. Lil ain't seen him since. Somewhere in North Arkansas, there's a little picket fence around a tiny church house, and a shady little glen, and out front the sign says, "Welcome, all you sinners, come on in." And below that sign, there's another sign just above the pastor's name. It tells next Sunday's sermon, and it always reads the same. It says, "Come and hear a message that will chill your very bones on the evils of adultery by the Reverend Horace Jones."
That's amazing.
It helped me stay awake. It got me through many a long night. I wrote a lot of them like that, but that's one that I have done for hundreds of people. My mother is in an assisted living thing at Holiday Island. She's 103 years old. And I was talking to the program director down there one day, and Mother had told this lady that I did a little poetry from time to time. And I went down there and did a few poems for them, and they're appreciative of any kind of entertainment, you know. But it just thrilled mothers to death. "Oh, that's my son up there," you know.
Well, once again, thank you very much for letting me come and ask you questions and chat. This was really enjoyable. So
Well, thank you.